All right, let's get right into it. Picture this. It's February 1959. You're deep in the completely frozen, desolate expanse of the northern Urals. A search and rescue team stumbles upon an abandoned tent. It belongs to 9 highly experienced hikers. It's half buried in snow, it's totally empty, and here's the detail that really gets you: it's been slashed open from the inside. There's no sign of a struggle, no sign of anyone else being anywhere near the camp. But then, as the searchers start moving down the slope, they begin to find the bodies. What actually happened to these 9 people has absolutely baffled investigators, scientists, and the public for exactly 65 years. So today in this explainer, we are going to unpack the incredible true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. We're looking directly at the evidence, the official files, and the theories that try to explain the inexplicable.
Minus 30 degrees Celsius. I mean, just think about that number for a second. The sheer, brutal reality of it is terrifying. When rescue teams found those first bodies, they quickly realized that the hikers had actually fled out into this unimaginable cold without their winter clothing. Many of them didn't even have their shoes on. Some were out there practically barefoot. Let's be real. To leave the safety of your tent in those conditions with any gear, that is a guaranteed death sentence. So what on earth could possibly be so terrifying that running out into a pitch black, minus 30-degree night seemed like the better option?
Well, the answer seems to lie in a terrifying paradox. The searchers found the tent cut open, right? But not from the outside by some attacker. It was slashed from the inside out. Whatever the threat was, these hikers were in such a state of absolute, frantic panic that they couldn't even take the few seconds required to just untie the entrance. They literally cut their way out, leaving behind their warm clothes, their food, and even their money.
To really understand how a totally routine expedition became a complete nightmare, we have to trace their steps. The group left Sverdlovsk by train on January 23, 1959. The whole goal was a 350-kilometer ski trek across the northern region to summit 2 peaks. Then, on January 28th, one of the hikers, a guy named Yuri Yudin, fell suddenly ill and had to turn back. And you know, that terrible luck actually saved his life. He ended up being the only survivor of the original 10. By February 1st, the remaining 9 set up their final camp on the slopes of Kolets-Sylyakho. When they failed to check in weeks later, authorities launched these massive searches. Students, the military, aviation, the whole shebang, which ultimately led to that horrific discovery on February 26th.
Now you might be thinking, were they just amateurs who wandered into the woods and made a rookie mistake? Absolutely not. That's a crucial point here. This was a highly competent group of students and alumni from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were profoundly experienced in Category 3 ski treks, which was literally the highest difficulty level you could do at the time. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, a 5th-year student who the pass would actually later be named after, was incredibly respected. Plus, their whole route was officially approved by the Soviet Tourist Commission. These were true survival experts, which, of course, makes their sudden, disorganized panic all the more incomprehensible.
When you look at the original expedition records, they reveal a fateful and honestly quite uncharacteristic decision. On February 1st, they reached the slopes of Kolets-Syakhl. Now, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, that translates to Mountain of the Dead. Probably due to the harsh, barren climate, but man, it certainly adds to the modern mystique, right? Anyway, for some unknown reason, maybe it was poor visibility, maybe just a navigation error, Dyatlov decided to pitch the tent right on the open, exposed slope at an altitude of about 1,079 meters instead of retreating down to the shelter of the tree line. And yet, their recovered diaries show that the evening was totally peaceful. They ate dinner, they got ready for bed, they even joked around in a little camp newspaper they made. There was zero warning of the hell that was about to break loose.
The layout of the crime scene, if we can call it that, is just overwhelming. About 1.5 kilometers from the tent, near a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest, the search parties found the first 2 bodies, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. They were just in their underwear near the remains of a tiny fire. And get this, the tree's branches were broken up to 5 meters high. It's as if someone was frantically climbing up to look back at the tent or trying to escape something down on the ground. Then, on the path heading back up the slope toward the tent, they found Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. They were frozen in these desperate crawling poses, clearly trying to make it back to shelter before the cold took them. But it was the remaining 4 victims, who were finally dug out from under 4 meters of snow in a ravine months later in May, that turned this tragedy into a true baffling enigma.
So here is where things go from tragic to completely inexplicable. The medical anomaly found in those 4 ravine bodies completely defied logic. Forensic experts discovered severe trauma. I'm talking a fractured skull, shattered ribs, massive chest damage. The medical examiner stated that the force required to cause these injuries was equivalent to being in a high-speed car crash. But here's the impossible part. There was zero corresponding external soft tissue trauma. No bruising, no cuts on the skin in those areas. It was as if they were crushed by some immense pressure without ever being physically struck by a blunt object. Oh, and add to this that some of the clothing tested positive for heightened radioactivity. Yeah, you can see why this became one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century.
After all these bizarre findings, the 1959 investigation lasted a grand total of about 3 months before it was abruptly sealed. The official conclusion was, to put it mildly, frustratingly vague. The authorities declared that the hikers died due to an insurmountable natural force. They never specified what that force actually was. Keep in mind, this expedition had been dedicated to an upcoming Communist Party Congress, so Soviet authorities were incredibly eager to just sweep this tragic, unexplained mess under the rug. Parts of the case were immediately classified, but this toxic mixture of bureaucratic silence, impossible crushing injuries, radioactive clothing, and an internally slashed tent, well, it inadvertently created a legend.
You know, nature hates a vacuum, and human curiosity hates it even more. In the absence of facts, the theories just exploded. To be impartial, we really have to look at what people believe for decades. A lot of folks suspected a secret KGB cleanup operation, thinking the hikers stumbled onto military secrets. Others pointed the finger at Soviet R-7 ballistic rocket tests. And that actually gained traction because other hikers, about 50 kilometers away, reported seeing glowing orbs in the sky around that exact time, leading to ideas about toxic rocket fuel causing blindness and mass panic. Then you had the more grounded theories, attacks by escaped Gulag prisoners or ambushes by local Mansi hunters. But here is the major sticking point. Investigators found zero physical footprints to support an attack. The Mansi even testified it would take a dozen armed men to overtake a group like this, which would leave extremely obvious tracks in the snow. Plus, historians rightly point out that a highly trained KGB cleanup squad would never leave a messy, highly visible tent behind for the public to find.
So if we steer away from human interference, we start seeing some truly fascinating scientific alternatives emerge. One major theory involves a phenomenon known as a Kármán vortex street. Basically, because of the specific dome-like shape of the mountain, extreme winds can wrap around it and create these swirling, repeating vortices. And these vortices can actually generate infrasound. That's a frequency of sound so low that human ears can't consciously hear it, but our bodies absolutely feel it. Infrasound is scientifically proven to induce completely inexplicable feelings of dread, panic, nausea, and severe anxiety. It's like a horror movie soundtrack playing directly into your nervous system. Combine that invisible terror with hurricane-force winds and a freezing night, and you might just have the trigger for a completely irrational, sudden evacuation of the tent.
But the most recent, and honestly arguably the most plausible scientific explanation comes from a 2021 study. Swiss geotechnical engineers used advanced computer modeling to propose a very specific type of microavalanche, a dense snow slab that released silently right onto the tent. Let's break it down. Step 1. This heavy, localized slab hits. Step 2. Because the hikers had actually laid their heavy wooden skis underneath the tent floor to insulate themselves against the snow, those skis acted like a hard anvil. So the snow essentially crushed the hikers between the heavy falling slab and the unyielding skis. That perfectly explains those high-speed car crash internal injuries with zero external trauma. Step 3. Imagine waking up in immense pain in pitch darkness, literally suffocating under heavy snow. You'd slash the tent in an absolute panic just to breathe. Step 4. Disoriented, severely injured, and freezing, they make the fatal decision to retreat down the mountain, eventually separating and succumbing to the cold.
Okay, so let's weigh the evidence between these two main camps. On one hand, the military and conspiracy theories are deeply compelling, right? Especially given the whole Cold War context and the genuinely bizarre detail of the radioactivity. But they consistently lack physical evidence at the scene. No extra footprints, no blast craters, no discarded weapons. And a planned cover-up just doesn't align with how chaotic and visible the abandoned camp was. On the other hand, the snow slab avalanche theory actually addresses the most baffling forensic anomaly we have, the internal crushing injuries without the external trauma. In fact, following a massive new review, the official Russian verdict, at least in 2020, formally concluded that an avalanche was indeed the cause of the tragedy, forcing them out into the cold where they ultimately perished.
And yet, despite the official verdict, despite the brilliant recent scientific models, the mystery endures. It highlights this really fascinating tension in human psychology. We have this deep desire for a sensational conspiratorial narrative, and it constantly battles against the much more likely reality of a mundane, tragic accident. One researcher captured this cultural phenomenon beautifully. They said, "The Dyatlov Pass is like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. They don't straighten it, they reinforce its current tilted position. Because this incompleteness is exactly what draws attention to it. There are just enough lingering questions.
Why the trace amounts of radioactivity? Why didn't they just stay together once they were out of the tent? It's those tiny, jagged pieces of the puzzle that don't quite fit that keep the legend alive, inspiring countless books, documentaries, and internet forums 65 years later.
Ultimately, the Dyatlov Pass incident is one of those rare cases where the most mundane explanation, a freak, highly localized avalanche, is very likely the closest thing we have to the truth. But, science doesn't lessen the profound human tragedy here. 9 young, vibrant, incredibly experienced people found themselves utterly powerless against a perfect storm of horrific circumstances that we may never be able to perfectly reconstruct. They lost their lives on that mountain, but they left behind a legacy that has captivated the entire world. So I want to leave you with this final thought as you look at all the facts we've gathered in this explainer today. Which force do you believe truly struck that tent on the Mountain of the Dead? Thanks so much for joining me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.